Topic: The real story of the first Apple store. Welcome to this English story. Today, we will listen to the real story of the first Apple store. Apple is famous today for the iPhone, MacBook, and iPad. But many years ago, things were very different. Apple was small, and many people thought it would fail. This story shows how Steve Jobs and his team took a big risk. They wanted to create a new kind of store. A place where people could touch Apple products, try them, and feel inspired. At first, many experts laughed. But in the end, the first Apple store changed everything. Let's begin this journey into the past. In the late 1990s, Apple was not the powerful company we know today. At that time, Apple was weak, small, and full of problems. The company had made some creative computers, but not many people were buying them. In fact, many business experts said Apple would soon die. Microsoft was big. Dell was big. HP was big. They controlled the computer market. But Apple? Apple was different. And sometimes, being different is not easy. Imagine this, it is 1998. You walk into a big electronics store. You want to buy a computer. On the left side, you see many machines with Microsoft Windows. They are everywhere. The salespeople are smiling. They quickly tell you about Dell, HP, and compact computers. They explain their features. They try to convince you to buy one. Now, on the other side, in the corner, you see Apple computers. Maybe there are one or two models. The salespeople do not seem excited. They do not explain much. Sometimes they even say, "Oh, Apple? It's expensive. It's not compatible with many programs. Maybe you should look at Windows instead." How would you feel as a customer? Probably confused. Maybe disappointed. This was the problem Apple faced. Their products were beautiful, but the shopping experience was bad. In 1997, something important happened. Steve Jobs returned to Apple. He was one of the original founders of the company. But years earlier, he had been pushed out. Now he was back, and the company was in trouble. Jobs was a man with strong vision. He believed in design. He believed technology could be simple, friendly, and elegant. He believed Apple still had a chance. But when he looked at the way Apple computers were sold, he was angry. He saw that the products were not respected. They were placed in dark corners. Nobody explained their beauty. Jobs thought, if we depend on these other stores, we will never succeed. We must control our own story. In a meeting with his team, Jobs said something surprising: we need our own stores. Everyone was shocked. At that time, computer companies did not open their own stores. They sold through electronics chains. Some people reminded Jobs about another company, Gateway. Gateway had tried to open their own stores. They failed. They lost money and had to close everything. Experts laughed and said, if Gateway failed, Apple will fail too. But Jobs was different. He was not afraid. He said, Apple is not Gateway. Apple is special. We sell experiences, not just machines. Jobs began to describe his dream: when people walk into our store, they should feel welcome. The space should be clean, open, and beautiful. Customers should touch the computers. They should try them without pressure. The store should feel human, not technical. This was not only about selling computers. It was about telling a story. It was about emotion. Jobs wanted the store to be like Apple itself, simple, elegant, and inspiring. To make this dream real, Jobs needed help. He called Ron Johnson, a retail expert from Target, a large retail chain. Johnson was excited, but also careful. He knew that opening stores was risky. Many things could go wrong: location, design, customer service, money. Still, he believed in Jobs' vision. Together, they started planning. The Apple team asked many questions. What should the store look like? How should customers walk inside? Where should the products be placed? What emotions should people feel when they enter? At first, the answers were not clear. The team made many designs. They rejected many ideas. Jobs was a perfectionist. He wanted everything to feel just right. Sometimes the meetings were long. Sometimes there were arguments. Sometimes people felt tired. But slowly, a vision began to appear. Jobs kept saying, the Apple Store must be different. It must be simple. It must be beautiful. And above all, it must be human. By the year 2000, the plan was ready. Apple would open its very first store. The location was chosen carefully, Tysons Corner, Virginia, USA. Still, many experts in the business world did not believe. They wrote in newspapers, Apple is making a big mistake. Apple will lose millions. This is the wrong move. But Steve Jobs did not care. He believed. He was calm and confident. He smiled and said, let's wait and see. And so, the journey began. Apple was about to open its first store. It was more than just a business plan. It was a dream, a vision, a risk. For Apple, it was the chance to change their future. For Steve Jobs, it was the chance to prove everyone wrong. The first Apple Store was coming soon. And the world would never be the same again. The year was 2000. Apple had decided to create its first store. But the question was, what should the store look like? This was not a small decision. The design of the store would decide if customers loved Apple or ignored it. Steve Jobs knew this very well. He wanted the store to be perfect. Jobs told his team, our store must be different. It cannot feel like other computer stores. It must feel simple, clean, and full of light. When people enter, they must feel calm. They must feel curious. They must feel welcome. Most computer stores at that time were crowded. They were full of boxes, wires, and signs. Salespeople shouted about discounts and prices. The stores were noisy, busy, and stressful. Jobs wanted the opposite. He wanted space. He wanted silence. He wanted beauty. Ron Johnson, the retail expert, became Jobs' partner in this journey. Johnson had worked at Target, a famous retail chain. He understood how people shopped. He understood that shopping was not only about products, it was also about feelings. Together, Jobs and Johnson asked many questions. Where should the computers be placed? Should the store have music? Should the staff wear special clothes? Should there be chairs, tables, or just machines? Every detail mattered. Jobs wanted to control everything, from the glass of the windows to the color of the walls. Apple built a secret prototype store in a warehouse. This was not open to the public. It was only for testing. In this hidden space, the team tried many designs. They placed tables in different ways. They tested different lighting. They asked themselves, does this feel comfortable? Does this feel inspiring? One time, the store looked too much like a library. Another time, it looked too much like a museum. Jobs was not satisfied. He wanted balance, simple, but not boring, beautiful, but not cold. Finally, they discovered something special, wooden tables. Instead of metal shelves or glass cabinets, they used simple wooden tables. On these tables, they placed Apple computers. Customers could walk around the table, touch the products, and try them. This idea was simple, but powerful. It made the store feel human. It made technology feel natural. Today, Apple stores around the world still use those wooden tables. But back then, it was a new idea. Another big idea was the Genius Bar. Jobs explained, when people have a problem, they should not feel afraid. They should not feel stupid. They should feel respected. Our store should have a place where experts, our geniuses, help people with patience and kindness. The Genius Bar was not just technical support. It was emotional support. Customers could ask any question, big or small. They could feel safe. This idea became one of the most loved parts of the Apple Store. The team also thought carefully about the staff. Jobs wanted friendly people, not pushy salespeople. He said, "Our employees should not pressure customers. They should listen. They should help. They should make people smile." So Apple decided to train staff in a special way. They learned how to welcome people. They learned how to explain technology in simple words. They learned how to make shopping feel like a conversation, not a sales pitch. Jobs was famous for his obsession with detail. Even the smallest things mattered to him. For example, the angle of the lighting on the tables, the distance between two computers, the font used on the signs, the smell of the air inside the store. He believed that details created feelings. If the details were perfect, the customer would feel comfortable, even if they did not know why. One engineer later said, Steve wanted to control things that other people didn't even notice. But in the end, those things made the store magical. While Apple was designing the store, many people outside the company laughed. Business magazines wrote articles saying the Apple Store would fail. One article even said, "The Apple Store will be a disaster. Within 2 years, they will close all of them." But inside Apple, the mood was different. The team was nervous, yes. But they were also excited. They felt they were building something new. Something the world had never seen. Before the first store opened, Apple invited small groups of people to test the prototype. These were not Apple employees, they were regular people. They asked them questions. How do you feel when you enter? Is it easy to find the computers? Do you feel comfortable asking for help? The answers were positive. People said the store felt open, friendly, and beautiful. They liked touching the products. They liked the idea of the Genius Bar. Jobs smiled. He knew they were ready. After months of work, Apple made the final decision. The first Apple Store would open in Tysons Corner, Virginia in May 2001. Everything was ready, the tables, the computers, the staff, the Genius Bar. The team felt nervous but hopeful. Steve Jobs told them, "Remember, this is not just a store. This is Apple's face to the world. This is our chance to show people who we are." The team nodded. They knew the risk. But they also believed in the vision. The date was set. The countdown had begun. The design journey was over. Now the real test would begin. Would people come? Would they like the store? Would Apple finally find its place in the world? No one knew for sure. But one thing was clear, the Apple Store was about to open its doors. And history was about to change. The date was May 19, 2001. The location was Tysons Corner, Virginia, USA. This was the day Apple would open its very first store. The night before the opening, the Apple team worked late. They cleaned the glass doors. They polished the wooden tables. They checked every computer, every cable, every light. Steve Jobs walked around the store quietly. He looked at the design, the products, the Genius Bar. He wanted everything to be perfect. Jobs was not a man who accepted mistakes. If something was not right, he would stop and fix it, even if it was small. That night, he told one worker to adjust the angle of a sign because it was not straight. The team was nervous but excited. They knew tomorrow would be historic. On the morning of May 19, something amazing happened. When the staff arrived at the store, they saw a long line of people waiting outside. Some had arrived hours before. Some had even camped overnight. They wanted to be the first customers to enter the new Apple Store. This surprised many people. Remember, Apple was not a giant company back then. But the excitement was real. People wanted to see something new. The staff felt happy and emotional. They realized this was not just a store opening, it was a celebration. At 10 a.m. the doors finally opened. The first customers walked in. The staff smiled and greeted them warmly. Inside, the store was bright, clean, and full of light. The wooden tables stood proudly with shiny iMacs, iBooks, and Power Macs. Customers could touch them, try them, and explore them freely. People looked around with wide eyes. Some said quietly, "Wow, this doesn't feel like a computer store. It feels like something different." One customer later said, "When I entered, I didn't feel stress. No one pushed me. No one shouted about discounts. I just felt comfortable. I could play with the computers. I could ask questions. It was fun." The Genius Bar was also a success. People loved the idea of experts helping them in a friendly way. One woman asked for help with her iMac, and the staff explained everything slowly and kindly. She smiled and said, "This feels safe. I don't feel stupid anymore." Soon, reporters and photographers came. They took pictures of the store, the products, and the happy customers. Some reporters were surprised by the excitement. They had read many negative articles before, but what they saw was very different. The store was full. People were smiling. The energy was strong. One newspaper wrote the next day, "Apple's first store is not just a shop. It is an experience." On the first weekend, the Tyson's Corner store made $599,000 in sales. This was a huge number for one store in just 2 days. It shocked the business world. Other companies had said Apple would fail. But now, Apple had proven them wrong. Steve Jobs was proud. But more than that, he was relieved. He knew the risk had been big. But now, he saw the reward. Just a few hours later, Apple opened its second store in Glendale, California. This was also a success. Together, the two openings showed the world that the Apple Store was not a mistake. It was the beginning of something powerful. For many customers, visiting the Apple Store was not about buying. It was about feeling. Some just wanted to touch the colorful iMacs. Others wanted to ask questions at the Genius Bar. Some simply wanted to walk around and enjoy the design. One young man said, "When I walked in, I felt like I was in the future. The store was so clean and open. It made me dream." Apple had created more than a shop. They had created a place of emotion. Before the opening, business experts had laughed. They wrote articles with titles like, "Why the Apple Store Will Fail." But after seeing the long lines and strong sales, many changed their minds. A famous journalist later admitted, "I was wrong. The Apple Store is one of the smartest moves Apple ever made." This was just the beginning, but already the world was paying attention. The Apple staff who worked that first day never forgot the experience. One employee said, "When I saw the first customer walk in, I almost cried. We had worked so hard. We were nervous. But when people smiled, when they touched the computers, I knew it was worth it." For Steve Jobs, the store was not just about money. It was about proving a point. It was about showing the world that Apple was alive, creative, and ready to grow again. The opening of the Tyson's Corner store was only the first step, but it was an important one. Apple had shown that a store could be more than a place to sell. It could be a place to inspire, to teach, to connect with people. On May 19, 2001, Apple changed the way technology was sold forever. And the journey was just beginning. The first Apple store at Tyson's Corner was a success. The second store in Glendale, California was also a success. People were surprised. Reporters were surprised. Even some Apple employees were surprised. But for Steve Jobs, this was just the beginning. He was not interested in only 2 stores. He wanted hundreds. He wanted Apple stores in every major city in America. Later, he wanted them around the world. The vision was big, and the journey had only started. In the first year, Apple opened 25 stores. Each store followed the same design rules: wooden tables with computers on display, a Genius Bar for friendly support. Bright, clean, and simple spaces. Staff trained to listen and help. Customers loved it. Some people visited the stores just to use the internet, because at that time not everyone had fast internet at home. Others came just to ask questions, even if they did not buy anything. The stores became more than shops. They became meeting places for people who loved Apple. Even with early success, some critics still doubted. One magazine wrote, "Apple stores are interesting, but how long can they survive? Will people keep coming? Or will the excitement disappear?" But the opposite happened. Month after month, more people came. Some were new customers who had never touched a Mac before. Some were loyal Apple fans who wanted to feel part of something special. The stores became busy, full of life. For many people, visiting the Apple Store became part of their weekend. Steve Jobs often said, "People don't just want to buy a computer. They want an experience," and he was right. At other computer stores, buying was quick and boring. You walked in, chose a box, paid, and left. But at the Apple Store, buying was different. You could spend an hour testing a Mac. You could listen to music on an iPod. You could ask questions. You could feel relaxed. Even if you didn't buy anything, you felt good. And later, when you did want a computer or an iPod, you remembered the Apple Store. As Apple opened more stores, the company needed more staff. But not just anyone could work there. Jobs wanted people with personality. The interview process was different. Applicants were not only asked about their knowledge of computers. They were also asked about their attitude, their energy, and their ability to talk with people. One manager explained, "We can teach people about Macs. But we cannot teach them how to smile. We need natural warmth." This idea became part of Apple's secret. Customers felt the difference. They felt respected and welcomed. In late 2001, Apple released a new product, the iPod. It was small, white, and simple. It could carry 1,000 songs in your pocket. At first, some people didn't understand it. But when they saw it in the Apple Store, everything changed. Customers could hold it, scroll the wheel, and listen to the sound. The experience was powerful. The iPod and the Apple Store became perfect partners. The store showed people why they needed the iPod, and the iPod made people visit the store. Sales exploded. Apple stores became busier than ever. As more stores opened, Apple began to experiment with architecture. Jobs wanted each store to be unique, but still clearly Apple. In New York, Apple planned a special store on Fifth Avenue. Jobs wanted something iconic. After many designs, they chose a giant glass cube. The cube stood on the street, and inside was a staircase leading underground to the store. When it opened in 2006, the glass cube became a landmark. Tourists visited it even if they didn't plan to buy anything. It became a symbol of Apple's boldness and creativity. Over time, Apple stores became more than just places to shop. They became community spaces. People came for free workshops to learn how to use Macs. Students came to edit movies or make music. Families came to ask questions together. The stores began to feel like schools, playgrounds, and social centers. People were not only customers, they were part of the Apple community. Other companies began to notice. Microsoft, Sony, and Samsung all studied the Apple Store model. They tried to copy the wooden tables, the open spaces, even the Genius Bar. But none of them could match the feeling. Customers said that Apple stores felt special. The design, the staff, the atmosphere, it all worked together. Steve Jobs had proven that retail could be different. He had changed the entire industry. The key to Apple's success was emotional connection. People didn't just buy a computer, they felt proud to own a Mac. They didn't just buy an iPod, they felt cool and modern. The store played a big role in building these emotions. When people walked into an Apple store, they felt part of something bigger. One customer said, "When I bought my first Mac at the Apple Store, it didn't feel like buying. It felt like joining a family." By 2004, just 3 years after the first opening, Apple already had over 80 stores. And the stores were making money, lots of money. In fact, Apple stores soon became the most profitable retail stores in the world, making more money per square foot than luxury brands like Tiffany and Co. The experts who once laughed were now silent. Steve Jobs was not always easy to work with. He was demanding, intense, and sometimes harsh. But when he saw the success of the stores, he felt joy. He once told his team, "Look at what we have created. We didn't just sell computers. We created places where people feel inspired." This is Apple. The vision was growing. The risk had been worth it. The Apple Store was no longer an experiment. It was a revolution. By the mid-2000s, Apple stores were everywhere in the US, and soon they would appear in Europe and Asia. The journey that started in Tyson's Corner was now spreading across the globe. But the story was not only about growth. It was about people, customers, staff, and dreamers who believed in Apple's vision. The Apple Store had become part of the world's culture. And yet, the most exciting chapters were still to come. By the mid-2000s, Apple stores in the United States were already a success. They were busy, profitable, and loved by customers. But Steve Jobs was not satisfied. He wanted more. For Jobs, Apple was not just an American company. He wanted Apple to be a global brand. That meant the Apple Store also had to travel the world. The time had come to open Apple stores outside the United States. Expanding globally was not simple. Each country had its own culture, style, and way of shopping. In some countries, people liked small shops. In others, they liked big malls. In some cultures, people wanted quick service. In others, they wanted long conversations. Jobs and his team studied everything carefully. They asked questions like, how do people shop in Japan? What do customers expect in Europe? What design would feel right in China? The answers were different, but one thing was the same: people everywhere wanted to feel respected. People everywhere loved beauty, and people everywhere wanted technology that was simple. In 2003, Apple opened its first store outside the US. It was in Tokyo, Japan. Why Japan? Because Japanese customers already loved design, style, and detail. Jobs believed they would understand Apple's vision. The Tokyo store was in a busy shopping district called Ginza. It was tall and modern, with glass walls and clean lines. Inside, it looked just like an American Apple store: wooden tables, bright lights, and friendly staff. On opening day, hundreds of people waited in line. Some had traveled from other cities just to see it. The Tokyo store was a success. It showed Apple that their vision could cross oceans and cultures. After Japan, Apple turned to Europe. In 2004, Apple opened its first European store in London, England. The location was Regent Street, one of the most famous shopping streets in the city. The building was old and historic, but Apple redesigned the inside to look modern and elegant. The mix of history and technology felt special. Londoners loved it. Tourists loved it. The store became a landmark. Some people even said, visiting the Apple Store is like visiting a museum of the future. But the biggest challenge was still ahead: China. China was growing fast. Millions of new customers wanted technology. If Apple could succeed in China, it could succeed anywhere. In 2008, Apple opened its first store in Beijing. The design included a giant glass cylinder leading underground to the store. It was dramatic, bold, and unforgettable. When it opened, thousands of people came. The store quickly became one of Apple's busiest in the world. Soon, Apple stores also appeared in Shanghai, Hong Kong, and many other Chinese cities. Each store had unique architecture but the same Apple feeling. As Apple expanded, the architecture of the stores became more creative. Jobs wanted each flagship store to feel iconic. In New York City's Fifth Avenue, the glass cube became a global symbol of Apple. In Shanghai, a huge glass cylinder entrance amazed visitors. In Paris, the store blended Apple's design with the beauty of old French architecture. In Dubai, a store opened with massive moving solar panels, combining technology and art. These stores were not just places to buy products. They were destinations. Tourists visited them like they visited famous monuments. Expanding globally was not always easy. In some countries, the way people shopped was very different. For example, in some places, customers were not used to touching products before buying. They preferred talking to salespeople first. Apple had to teach people that it was okay to walk in, play with the iMacs or iPhones, and explore. In other countries, staff training had to be adjusted. The Apple style of friendly, informal conversation was new in some cultures. But slowly, it worked. Customers began to enjoy the relaxed, open feeling. One interesting thing happened as Apple stores opened worldwide. Customers from different countries started to share the same experience. A teenager in New York and a teenager in Tokyo could both visit an Apple store, touch the same products, and feel the same design. It made people feel connected. Apple had created a global family. The global expansion of Apple stores had a huge impact on the company. In countries where people didn't know much about Apple, the stores became the best introduction. Customers who had never used a Mac before suddenly understood it. When the iPhone was released in 2007, Apple stores around the world became the center of the excitement. People stood in long lines not just in America, but in London, Tokyo, Paris, and Hong Kong. The stores turned Apple into a true global brand. Steve Jobs was proud of the expansion. He often visited new stores quietly, walking around and observing. He watched customers touch the products, smile, and ask questions. He loved seeing families exploring together. Jobs once said, "When I see people in our stores, I don't just see customers. I see the future of Apple. This is what we built it for." By the end of the 2000s, Apple had more than 300 stores in over 10 countries. The Apple Store was no longer just an American experiment. It was a global success. And everywhere it opened, it brought the same message: technology can be simple. Technology can be beautiful. Technology can be human. As Apple stores spread around the globe, they became symbols of modern life. Tourists visited them like landmarks. Cities were proud to host them. Other companies tried to copy them, but none could match the magic. Apple had not only sold millions of computers, iPods, and iPhones. They had changed the way the world thought about shopping, technology, and design. The Apple Store was now part of global culture. And this was only the beginning of Apple's greatest era. By 2007, the Apple Store had already proven itself as a successful idea. Customers loved the design, the Genius Bar, and the experience of exploring products in a beautiful space. But Apple was about to enter a new chapter, one that would change not just the company, but the entire world. That new chapter began with a single device, the iPhone. On January 9, 2007, in San Francisco, Steve Jobs walked on stage at the Macworld conference. With his usual black turtleneck and jeans, he told the audience, "Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone." He introduced the iPhone as 3 products in one, an iPod with touch controls. A revolutionary phone. A breakthrough internet device. The crowd cheered, but nobody could imagine how big this product would become. When the iPhone was finally released in June 2007, the Apple Store became the center of the story. Lines of people formed outside the stores days before launch. Some camped outside with sleeping bags. Others brought food and chairs. They didn't just want to buy a phone. They wanted to be part of history. When the doors opened, the scene was electric. Staff clapped and cheered as the first customers entered. The sound of applause filled the store. Many people cried with joy when they held the iPhone in their hands. Some called it the future in my pocket. The iPhone was not just another phone. It had no keyboard. It was all screen. You could tap, swipe, and pinch with your fingers. For many people, this was their first time using a touchscreen in such a natural way. The Apple Store was the perfect place to show it. Customers walked in, picked up an iPhone, and instantly understood how it worked. The product and the store were made for each other. The Genius Bar became more important than ever after the iPhone launch. People came with questions like, how do I connect to Wi-Fi? How do I send an email? How do I download apps? Geniuses explained everything step by step. For many customers, it was their first smartphone. The Apple Store made sure they didn't feel lost. This personal support made customers more loyal. They didn't just buy a phone. They joined a community. In 2008, Apple launched the App Store. Suddenly, the iPhone was not only a device, it was a platform. You could download apps for games, music, maps, language learning, or almost anything you could imagine. Again, the Apple Store was the stage. Staff showed customers how to use apps, how to download them, and how to explore the new world of mobile software. People didn't just buy a phone anymore. They bought a lifestyle. Every year, when a new iPhone came out, the same scene repeated. Long lines outside Apple stores. Customers waiting all night. Excitement in the air. It became a global tradition. From New York to Tokyo, from London to Beijing, people lined up together. They took selfies, shared food, and celebrated like it was a festival. News reporters came to film the lines. TV stations showed images of people cheering in Apple stores around the world. The launch of a new iPhone was no longer just a product release. It was an event. The success of the iPhone turned Apple into the most valuable company in the world. And the Apple Store was right at the heart of it. Whenever Apple announced a new iPhone, customers didn't go to a random electronics shop. They went straight to the Apple Store. They trusted the brand, the staff, and the experience. The store became a symbol of innovation. It was where the future arrived. For many people, buying their first iPhone was emotional. Some parents bought iPhones for their children as graduation gifts. Some grandparents bought iPhones to stay connected with family. Some young people saved for months just to buy one. The Apple Store saw tears, laughter, and celebrations. Each purchase felt like a milestone in life. One customer once said, "I didn't just buy a phone. I bought a memory I will never forget." The success of the iPhone also pushed Apple to expand its stores even faster. More stores opened in Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. Everywhere, the iPhone was the star. In cities where people didn't know much about Apple before, the iPhone made them curious. They visited the store, tried it, and often walked out as proud owners. The iPhone didn't just grow Apple's business, it made the Apple Store even more important in global culture. For Steve Jobs, the iPhone was the perfect example of what he had always believed: technology should be beautiful. It should be easy to use. And it should connect people emotionally. The Apple Store played a key role in sharing that belief with the world. Without the stores, the iPhone might not have created the same magic. Jobs knew this. That is why he cared so deeply about every detail of the stores. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, millions of people around the world had iPhones. The way people lived changed. They used iPhones to take photos, share messages, listen to music, and navigate the world. The smartphone era had begun. And every new step of that journey started inside the glass walls of an Apple Store. Looking back, the launch of the iPhone in 2007 was more than a product release. It was a revolution. The Apple Store was not just a shop, it was the stage where the revolution happened. It turned technology into an experience. It turned shopping into a memory. The iPhone and the Apple Store together changed not only Apple, but the way people around the world live, work, and connect. The revolution had begun, and it was unstoppable. By 2011, Apple was at the height of its success. The iPhone was changing lives. The iPad, launched in 2010, was opening a new market. Apple stores were crowded with excited customers every day. But behind the scenes, something painful was happening. Steve Jobs, the man who had built this dream, was very sick. Jobs had been fighting cancer for several years. Even as his health declined, he continued to work, design, and inspire his team. He visited Apple stores quietly, checking every detail, still caring about the experience. In August 2011, Jobs resigned as CEO. He knew his health would not allow him to continue. A few months later, on October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away. The world mourned. Millions of people left flowers, notes, and photos outside Apple stores around the globe. In New York, Paris, Tokyo, Beijing, and many other cities, the stores became places of remembrance. People wrote messages on post-it notes and placed them on the glass walls. Some said, "Thank you, Steve." Others wrote, "You changed my life." The Apple Store had once again become more than a shop. It had become a place where people could share emotions together. After Jobs' death, many people asked, can Apple continue without Steve Jobs? Can the Apple Store stay special without him? The company was now led by Tim Cook, who had worked closely with Jobs. Cook was different, calm, steady, and more focused on operations. But he shared Jobs' respect for design and customer experience. Cook's challenge was not just to keep Apple successful. It was to protect Jobs' legacy. Under Tim Cook, Apple stores continued to grow. But there were also new changes. In 2014, Apple hired Angela Ahrendts, the former CEO of Burberry, as head of retail. She brought fresh ideas. She wanted Apple stores to feel less like shops and more like town squares. She called the new vision Today at Apple. Stores began offering free workshops on photography, coding, art, and music. Families came not just to shop but to learn. Schools visited for lessons on creativity and technology. The stores became community spaces where people could grow, connect, and share. This was a new step in Jobs' dream. Apple stores were now places of both shopping and education. In the 2010s and 2020s, Apple continued to design breathtaking flagship stores around the world. In Milan, a store opened with a huge fountain at the entrance. In Singapore, Apple built a store floating on the water, glowing at night like a lantern. In Bangkok, a circular glass store stood beside a river, looking futuristic yet natural. In Los Angeles, Apple renovated the famous Tower Theater, turning history into technology. Each store was unique but still carried the same Apple DNA, simplicity, elegance, and light. By the mid-2020s, Apple had more than 500 stores in over 25 countries. From the United States to Brazil, from India to the United Arab Emirates, the stores had become part of city life. They were tourist attractions, meeting spots, and cultural icons. Apple stores also continued to employ tens of thousands of people worldwide. Staff were trained not just to sell, but to listen, teach, and connect emotionally with customers. The vision of Steve Jobs, a store where people feel inspired, was alive in every country. As new Apple products arrived, the stores remained the stage. The Apple Watch launch in 2015 brought health and fitness to the center. The AirPods launch in 2016 made wireless music part of daily life. The Apple Vision Pro in the 2020s introduced people to mixed reality. Every time, customers first experienced these devices inside an Apple store. Staff guided them, let them try the products, and explained new features in simple ways. The ritual never changed. The store was where technology became human. Even years after his death, Steve Jobs' spirit was still present in the stores. The clean lines, the glass walls, the wooden tables, all of it carried his fingerprint. Many customers who visited for the first time didn't even know Jobs personally. But they felt the magic he had designed. On anniversaries of his passing, some stores still receive flowers, candles, and notes of gratitude. For many people, Apple stores are part of his living memory. The greatest success of the Apple Store was not sales or profit. It was the emotional connection it created. A teenager buying her first iPhone. A father bringing his child to a coding workshop. A grandmother learning FaceTime to see her grandchildren. These stories happened every day in Apple stores around the world. They showed that technology is not just about machines. It is about people, relationships, and memories. This was Steve Jobs' true legacy. Looking ahead, Apple continues to innovate. Stores are becoming more sustainable, with solar energy, recycled materials, and green designs. Apple is also exploring virtual and augmented reality shopping. In the future, people may connect with Apple stores digitally, but the physical spaces will remain important. Why? Because people need places where they can touch, see, and feel. A digital screen cannot replace the smile of a helpful staff member or the excitement of holding a new product for the first time. The Apple Store will keep evolving, but its heart will remain the same. From one small idea in 2001, Apple stores grew into a global phenomenon. They changed the way people shop, the way people learn, and even the way people grieve and celebrate together. Steve Jobs once said, "People don't know what they want until you show it to them." The Apple Store showed the world something it didn't know it needed. And today, decades later, millions of people are still walking through those glass doors, still feeling that same sense of wonder. The story of the Apple Store is not just the story of a company. It is the story of vision, courage, and human connection. And that story is still being written, every day, in cities across the world. Thank you for listening to this story about the Apple Store. We saw how a simple idea grew into a global success. From the first store in 2001 to hundreds of stores today, Apple changed not only shopping but also the way people connect with technology. Steve Jobs' dream continues to live on in every Apple store around the world. I hope this story helped you practice English listening, learn new words, and feel inspired. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe for more English stories. See you in the next video.